Checklist of ISO IEC 27001 A.15.2.2 Managing changes to supplier services. The services provided by suppliers are critical to the success of an organization. However, changes in the way contracted services are delivered or the introduction of new services can have an impact on the organization's information security. Therefore, it is essential to have a process in place to manage changes to supplier services to ensure that any potential risks are identified and addressed. This video provides a checklist for organizations to assess how they manage changes to supplier services and comply with security policies, standards, and regulations. Sample checklist: Managing changes to supplier services. Identify the types of changes that can be made to supplier services, such as changes in the way services are delivered, or the introduction of new services. Develop a process for managing changes to supplier services. Assign responsibility for managing changes to supplier services to a specific individual or team. Ensure that the process for managing changes to supplier services is documented. Communicate the process for managing changes to supplier services to all relevant parties, including suppliers and internal stakeholders. Regularly review and update the process for managing changes to supplier services. Compliance with security policies, standards, and regulations. Identify the security policies, standards, and regulations that suppliers are required to comply with. Ensure that suppliers are aware of the security policies, standards, and regulations they must comply with. Develop a process for monitoring and verifying supplier compliance with security policies, standards, and regulations. Assign responsibility for monitoring and verifying supplier compliance with security policies, standards, and regulations to a specific individual or team. Ensure that the process for monitoring and verifying supplier compliance with security policies, standards, and regulations is documented. Regularly review and update the process for monitoring and verifying supplier compliance with security policies, standards, and regulations. Handling changes in practice. Determine how changes to supplier services will be handled in practice. Develop a plan for communicating changes to supplier services to all relevant parties, including internal stakeholders and suppliers. Ensure that the plan for communicating changes to supplier services is documented. Review the plan for communicating changes to supplier services regularly. Ensure that suppliers understand how changes in security policies, standards, and regulations may impact their services. Develop a process for verifying that suppliers are compliant with new security policies, standards, and regulations. Managing changes to supplier services and complying with security policies, standards, and regulations are essential to ensure the security of an organization's information. By using the checklist provided in this video, organizations can assess how they manage changes to supplier services and comply with security policies, standards, and regulations. Organizations need to have a process in place for managing changes to supplier services, ensuring supplier compliance with security policies, standards, and regulations, and communicating changes to suppliers. By taking these steps, organizations can minimize the potential for security breaches and ensure that their information remains secure.